and are compatible with defending the climate and defending the environment, fighting climate change. And it's quite now, it has become a little bit of a cliche. I think that it was a useful contribution. By the time we put it out, it was not that it was a completely new issue. It was the question of, it was systematized, and it was methodologically demonstrated, and it had a few paths that you could go through in order to prove the point. And I think this is exactly what it did. It continues to do that. And I like to praise my colleagues from Environment here. See Mr. Cox over there, the extreme left there. The Director of Environment here, Mr. Lassie, and his teams. But you know, the idea was precisely to help all the leaders get on with what I would call a hybrid solution that would not make this dichotomy of saying it's either the environment or business. You know, they can and should go well together. Now, we also show in that work that actually after a few years, you can add a few percentage points to the growth if you pursue that course. So it's not, you know, it's not neutral or negative to growth. Actually, it can actually enhance growth. And so the key message is that policymakers need to take a whole of government approach to ensure that broader investment conditions are supportive of low emissions growth. This means rectifying policy misalignments. It means putting a price on carbon, a big flat price on carbon. That's the scientific version of the OECD. Put a big fat price on carbon. It's still the valid way, notwithstanding whoever is in denial about this. Improving planning processes, improving regulations, but also reforming the fossil fuel subsidies. We are spending hundreds of billions in subsidizing emissions with one hand and fighting them with the other hand. It is the most, crazy situation. It is a total, negation of what it is that we're trying to do. We are actually making it easy for people to use fossil fuels, making it cheap. And if you make it cheap, you make it easy. And if you make it easy and cheap, it's going to happen. While at the same time, you're trying to put a big price on carbon. Isn't it totally and completely contradictory? Now, the OECD estimates that around 6.3 trillion of annual infrastructure investment is required until 2030 to meet global development needs. 6.3 trillion. It's a lot of zeros around. But how do we make sure that these investments are climate compatible, that they're consistent? Well, we calculate that it would cost an additional 10%. With 10%, you can make sure that these investments are absolutely compatible. And if you make it, you get scale, then you can reduce some of these costs. So you can make it climate compatible, but you can also, with technology and with, long term, you'll save. What will you save? Fuel. And because you'll save fuel, then you take away part of this additional cost. So you have in the solution, you have the answer to the problem. You put the solution first, and then it answers the problem before the problem becomes unsurmountable. Let me highlight two current initiatives that we have the day at the OECD, where we're talking about investments and having to do with the Paris Agreement. First, we have an OECD, World Bank, United Nations Environment Initiative. It's called Financing Climate Futures, Rethinking Infrastructure. It's supported by the German government. We thank the German government for their support. It identifies 6 priority action areas for driving transformational change. It's planning infrastructure for a low emission and resilient future, unleashing innovation to accelerate the transition, ensuring fiscal sustainability, resetting the financial system in line with long-term climate risks and opportunities. So the logic, the calculations, what are you going to finance and how? Rethinking development finance. And then, last but not least, empowering subnational governments. Why? Because that's where most of these things are happening. At the regions, at the provinces, at the city level even. And one of the most difficult things in the world is the national, the regional, the provincial, the cities. The coordination thereof. And because we're all democracies, of course, you have different parties, people who are leaving, there's always an election coming. And therefore you always delay the hard decisions because there's an election. And you just keep delaying, procrastinating. So, now, let me also say that we released these 6 key messages last September during the New York Climate Week. But they were kind of the preliminary, there was an amuse-bouche, as our host here in France would say. But we will launch our final report in the next few days. Financing Climate Futures, Rethinking Infrastructure. The final report will be launched in the next few days. So stay tuned, as they say. I encourage you all to take a close look. Second, tomorrow, we will launch a new OECD study. It's called Developing Robust Project Pipelines for Low Carbon Infrastructure. This will show that governments need to strengthen significantly their efforts to develop what we call these project pipelines. That means, okay, what are we planning for, and what comes, one after the other? Where are we going? It's like a GPS sort of thing. And the question is that without detailed infrastructure investment plans, a plan, not a project and another project and another project, but a plan for infrastructure that is consistent and coherent. It is unclear what project investments are needed, which are the priority ones, where and when they should build, how they should be financed, in what sequence, or whether they are in line with long-term climate and development objectives. It becomes a race for the money to prove to the financiers that the project self-standing makes sense. Which is good, a good project, a reasonable project, project that yields enough in order to pay for itself. The question is, does it make sense in the broader order of things? Dear friends, we at the OECD stand ready to support the efforts of countries, of investors, of businesses, of civil society, to mobilize green finance and investment. Greening our financial sector, greening our investments, is one of the single most powerful things we can do to tackle climate change and put our societies and economies on a sustainable growth path. We can achieve this. But to do that, we need to confront the challenge head on. So I urge you to seize the opportunity of this forum, of these discussions. As I said, none of you need convincing. But perhaps what we all need is a reinforced conviction about the fact that we can. And second, that perhaps if we don't, nobody else will. And that is also a very powerful motivation. So let's have collective, bold, decisive, urgent discussions that will allow for collective, bold, decisive, urgent action. Thank you all very much.
Secretary General, thank you very much for a characteristically rousing introduction. I think your points about